Hello?
Welcome back to the Tin Can Dispatch. I'm Austin Lillard, and as always, I am joined by my co-host, Reagan Lillard. Reagan, how's it going?
Oh, doing great. Having a wonderful day. Always blessed.
Amen. It is a beautiful, cold Sunday afternoon.
Very.
We had hot, well, I say hot. It's, hot for this time of year. It was about 75 degrees yesterday, and then it dropped way down into the 30s last night. So it was it's a cold, windy day. So it's a good day to be shut up inside doing a podcast.
We got, I think it was 19 degrees last night with the wind chill of 11.
Oh yeah, y'all are a little further north, so yeah, it makes it feel like December. So we got Christmas coming up. You know what? I got something in my eye. Let me just get that. We got Christmas coming up, and when we first started the podcast, I just looking forward to what we'd be doing. I thought about doing maybe a Christmas special or a Christmas series coming into December, but just how the cards fell, it ended up us doing Samson for this time of year. But we do want to acknowledge that this is being recorded in the height of the holiday season.
Yes.
So
as of today, it is December 14th.
Right. Yeah. So we will we'll acknowledge that, but we're not going to do any specific Christmas content, I don't think. Maybe next year we'll do a Christmas special. But that is to say, we're going to get back started on our Samson series. We're halfway through, and we took a little bit of an intermission to talk about the book of Philemon, which I think was an awesome episode.
Yes, I do too. I had a great time in that one.
Yeah, it was a little bit off the cuff because I texted you and was like, hey, didn't have time to work on the notes this week. It's been a busy week. I taught on Philemon. Let's just do that. And we did it. And it actually is one of our better performing episodes of the whole show.
Yeah.
So I was happy to see that. We're going to jump back into Samson here. But before we do that, I want to revisit our old friend of the week. Last Samson episode, it was Spurgeon. I've got a little bit of a different one this time, and this will kind of set the stage for this chapter. And this is probably one of my favorite chapters of the Samson story. There's only 4, and we're in the third one, but this is where we kind of see Samson at his best, at his most useful against the Philistines, and it is, I would say, least foolish, because well, in reality, we really only get like 60-something verses of Samson in total.
Right,
And for the entire last chapter, it was like we talked about, it was mostly just a bachelor party gone bad, along with him tearing apart the lion. I don't want to spoil the next episode, but things go not great for him in that one. So this one, Samson actually sees some victory. He sees some usefulness in the eyes of the Lord. And it's a good insight into some more of Samson's character. So, but before we get to Samson, I want to talk about John Owen. John Owen was an English Puritan. He was a nonconformist church leader, a theologian, and he was actually the vice chancellor of the University of Oxford. He was born in 1616 and he died in 1683. So we're going a little bit further back. But there was this quote, and I thought it was really good for sort of the situation Samson finds himself in these chapters. It says, "Do you make it your daily work? Be always at it whilst you live. Cease not a day from this work." And the last part of that is, "Be killing sin, or it will be killing you." And I've heard that quote before of this section, just the last section, "Be killing sin, or it will be killing you." But for that whole quote, do you make it your daily work? Be always at it whilst you live. Cease not a day from this work. Be killing sin, or it will be killing you. And the reason I wanted to bring this quote in, specifically the "be killing sin, or it will be killing you," we see in the opening of this chapter a great tragedy that happens at the hands of the Philistines, and we can see the Philistine, as we've covered over and over and over. We can see these people groups that Israel did not run out of the promised land like they were supposed to. We can see it as an encroachment of the world, an encroachment of sin, and an encroachment of the flesh. And so Samson's charged to begin to deliver the people of Israel from the Philistines. But you can see every time he lets up, every time he gives a little bit of ground, tragedy strikes. So
Yeah.
to say, be killing sin or it will be killing you, it's this constant, this daily struggle, this daily pursuit. Scripture talks about Saul pursuing David daily. It was a daily
Yeah.
pursuit. And we as Christians, our salvation is safe in Christ, but it is a daily pursuit for
Yeah.
us to search out our heart, to be killing the sin, or that temptation will find us, and that temptation
Yeah.
will latch onto us. And so for
Yeah.
Samson, we could say, be killing Philistines, or Philistines be killing you.
Yeah. Which I think that's really, really awesome you brought that up, because my pastor actually, which also my father-in-law coincidentally, brought this up this morning about moving forward, talking about Psalm 119, specifically verse 105, talking about God's word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. And among the other things, saying, really putting the emphasis on, if you're not moving forward, you're moving backward. Um, and brought up a really cool point, I thought, about how the armor of God is meant for protection in the front, not protection from the rear. You're meant to be moving forward in that, and
Right.
constantly conquering.
I like that. Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I was thinking yesterday about this episode and about putting these notes together and stuff. And for some reason, a treadmill just stuck in my head, because I've done lessons before on moving forward and whatnot, and I like the
Yeah.
idea of a treadmill, because when it comes to be killing sin or it will be killing you, it's like moving on a treadmill. Not in the fact that you're not making any progress, but the fact is, if you stay still, it's not going to be long before you're moving backwards.
Yep.
Um,
Exactly.
so you always want to be progressing. You always want to be taking more ground. You always want to be purging the land of the Philistines, as
Yeah.
it were.
Yeah.
Excellent point. Excellent point. So with that being said, we're going to go into keep going into the story of Samson. Do you remember where we last left off? What situation Samson had found himself in?
You can't do this to me. Well, he had his best man had stolen his woman.
Yeah,
I remember that much.
So that's the main point.
Yeah.
That's the main point we're gonna make. So
Okay.
he comes.
That's
home,
where you were going with
yeah,
that.
yeah. That's where we needed to get to. I'm leaving
Okay.
that in, by the way.
I remember that much.
It's been a couple weeks. Anyway.
It's been a long
that's
couple
funny.
of weeks.
Yeah, no, I feel that. So anyway, so that's the main point. So we see at the very end, it just kind of makes mention of, hey, he came back and his best man has his girl, and it doesn't really elaborate. But here in these next few verses, we see the elaboration of what actually happened, and it does make sense as to because there were more parties involved than just his best man. 1 through 3.
Yeah. After some days at the time of the wheat harvest, Samson went to visit his wife with the young goat. And he said, I will go into my wife in the chamber. But her father would not allow him to go in. And her father said, I really thought you utterly hated her, so I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister more beautiful than she? Please take her instead. And Samson said to them, this time I shall be innocent in regard to the Philistines when I do them harm.
So this is kind of like it's a sort of a comedic break in things. I mean, depending on how you look at it. The first thing that stuck out to me is, like, instead of, Samson's going and trying to make things right, and he just assumes, like, hey, I mean, she's still my wife, so I'm just gonna go. But he brings a goat. Like, he doesn't bring flowers, he doesn't bring chocolates. He's like, I know what'll fix this. A goat.
I mean,
so, but he goes up and he's like, hey, I'm here to see my wife. Like, she's my wife, and her dad. And this does make sense, because the fathers had a lot to do with the, had a lot to do with, I can't. Had a lot to do with giving away the bride. They had a much more active role and a much more authoritative role than what we would have in our culture. In our culture, it's just sort of a ceremonial thing to, just a respect thing to, go and ask, for the daughter's hand in marriage. But like in their culture, it was literally like the father had the authority. Hey, I'm giving he had the authority on who he gave his daughter to. And that's why he gave it to Samson's best man, because she probably didn't have a whole lot of say in the matter. Like he gave her to him. And so her father said, I really thought that you utterly hated her, so I gave her to your companion. And so we don't really know where he gets this idea. It's there were some commentators that said it's possible that she turned her father against Samson,
Yeah.
or the other Philistines did.
Mm.
But all we can say within the text is he really did think that Samson hated her.
Yeah.
And so and then he tries to smooth it over a little bit and say, is not her younger sister more beautiful than she? Please take her instead. And apparently Samson didn't think so, because
Yeah.
he gets mad enough to say, okay, this time, like whatever happens to the Philistines, I'm gonna be completely justified.
Yep.
And what happens next is pretty brutal. We don't have a whole lot, I don't have a whole lot to say about that particular instance, and that it's just kind of a funny interaction between Samson and his would-be father-in-law. But there's a lot more content here that we're going to get to in these next parts about the foxes and the jawbone. And speaking of jawbone, there's a thing I want to ask you about the jawbone, and it's a misconception I had going into this, that when I really studied it out. And when I say studied it out, looked at a different translation other than the KJV, about something to do with the jawbone. But we'll get to that. So anyway,
I liked what the Guzik commentary here said on verse 3. Says, God used Samson's ungodly anger for his purposes. As Psalm 76:10 says, surely the wrath of man shall praise you. This doesn't justify Samson's anger, but it shows the glory and power of God to use all things to his purposes. So even though, we can't, say it was 100% right what's fixing to happen, God used that to his purposes. He used Samson's his fleshly anger to fulfill his greater purpose.
Right. And and that's going to be a very important thing to see in this story and in the book of Judges as a whole, because it's really cool to see the spectrum of the people that God used in the book of Judges. Just to see, because they're all different characters, and it would be a boring story if every single character was exactly the same. Like we sort of gave Othniel credit for being sort of the just judge and him having a short story and there not being a lot to elaborate on. But it wouldn't be as interesting of a story from a storytelling perspective. This isn't even tapping into the fact that they were real people and this really happened. But just from a storytelling perspective, it would be a boring story if it was just like 15 chapters of just everybody, like 15 chapters of somebody that looked like Othniel, like coming up over and over and over, all these different characters looking exactly the same. And so God used Deborah the way he used Deborah. God used Ehud the way he used Ehud, and he used them in different ways. None of them were used in the same way. It was all different situations. It was all different of this. And the Philistines, they needed to be dealt with in a brutal way, and so the Lord raised up a brutal judge. He may have had anger issues. He may have made some rash decisions at some points, but there were methods that Samson used specific to his character and his personality that were necessary for the time for God to use for his purposes. And I said this on the first episode. Samson was sort of like the tactical nuke against the Philistines. And specifically with nuclear warfare, there's going to be some extraneous damage, but it gets the job done,
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, that's a very good point. But like you said, all of this is towards the causes of the Lord and his movement against the Philistines, because the people did cry out, for deliverance from the Philistines. He's just using some unorthodox methods to accomplish that goal.
Very.
And speaking of unorthodox messages, that'll lead us right into verse 4.
Yeah. So Samson went and caught 300 foxes and took torches. And he turned them tail to tail and put a torch between each pair of tails. And when he had set fire to the torches, he let the foxes go into the standing grain of the Philistines and set fire to the stacked grain and the standing grain, as well as the olive orchards.
Okay, so this is a very from the first glance, it's just like, what?
Yeah.
How do you even get that idea? And it's a point I want to make, because you don't get this idea just off the top of your head. You get it because you're thinking of, how am I going to get retribution in the best way I know possible? Because this situation took time. You don't just in your rash anger go out and collect 300 foxes. Like
Yeah.
that's not like a knee jerk reaction. That's something you think about. That's something you go out. The time it took him to collect 300 foxes, and there's some question on whether or not it was actual foxes, because foxes aren't known to travel in packs. Which, I
Right. Yeah.
mean, if it says, some people think it might have actually been jackals, because jackals are known to run in large packs, sometimes like up to 200. Um, and there's some because some people do raise objection to this and say there's no way that he could actually do this. And David
Yeah.
Guzik does give some maybe some food for thought on this. He said,
Mhm.
first, it could have been jackals, maybe not foxes. Second, there's nothing that says Samson did this all by himself. Third, there's nothing that says he did it all in one day. And that's kind of what I wanted to focus on, that doing it
Yeah.
all in one day,
Yeah.
because it was a thoughtful process. And it reminded me of the situation of Jesus cleansing the temple in
Mhm.
John chapter 2. And I want to read these verses just so we can get the full context, and I want to talk about it. So it's John chapter 2, verse 13. It says, the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem, and in the temple he found those who were selling oxen and sheep and pigeons, and the money changers sitting there. And making a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple, and with the sheep and oxen, and he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And he told those who sold the pigeons, "Take these things away. Do not make my father's house a house of trade."
I
And the
think I know exactly where you're going with this.
Yeah, so the thing I want to mention is, it says, in verse 15, it says, and making a whip of cords. And it mentions this in a couple different places in the Gospels. But
Mhm.
making a whip of cords, like, and braiding a whip, like, that takes time.
Takes a
It
very long
doesn't
time.
say right. It doesn't say he went and stole a whip off of a guy and used that. It says he made his
No.
own whip. He
Mhm.
took the time, sat down, braided the whip, thought about exactly what he was about to do the entire
Yeah.
time he's braiding that whip. Probably, I can picture him kind of in the corner of the temple, braiding this whip, looking exactly who he's about to run off. And it's a very thoughtful process.
Yeah.
And I want to compare that to this situation with Samson, because
Mhm.
Samson is a very brash person. Sometimes he does make bad decisions, but in this specific instance, it's not a knee-jerk reaction that he just goes and does this. It's a thoughtful act of retribution against the Philistines.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
he's not gonna
and
just, in a rash way, collect 300 jackals.
right,
Uh,
yeah, exactly. And
that's something that's gonna take a
I want
little
to
bit
make it
of time.
right, yeah, and I want to make a distinction, because Samson's not just some dumb jock. Like, he's not all air between the ears.
Right.
And it's even something interesting with the riddle that we talked about last time.
Right.
And I want to put a pin in that, because we're going to talk about that here in a minute after his victory on the jawbone. But it's the idea of the warrior poet. But we're
Mhm.
going to put a pin in that. But you had something you wanted to bring up about the foxes.
Yeah, yeah, I thought it was really cool. I was doing some reading in the Adam Clark commentary, and he, well, first off, the foxes are the creature called Shual. I guess that's the Hebrew. They abounded in Judea, so they're mentioned several times in Lamentations, Nehemiah, Ezekiel, uh, twice in Joshua, First Samuel. So we know that it's a very abundant creature in the area. In Rome, they had a ceremony where I'm assuming it was at the Colosseum, or they called it the theater. So I'm assuming it could be several different places in the Colosseum type event, but they would basically, it's kind of pretty brutal. They would set these foxes on fire, let them run out into the theater area, and the crowd would cheer as the foxes burnt to death. And there was there's a Roman poet that was kind of curious about the tradition of this, and so he asked. It was a Cyrilian man about it, and he said that they had traced the tradition back to a boy that had strapped a torch basically to a fox that had killed a lot of hens during. They said it was during April and during the harvest, but it wouldn't have matched the Cyrilian or the Roman harvest. It would have matched the Philistine harvest in the Palestine area at the time, and
Mm.
so it's more likely that Roman tradition came from a Judean tradition of which there is some evidence behind there being an annual celebration of the burning of the Philistines' crops by Samson. So
Yeah, because they had a
I'll just
lot of like the Jewish people had a lot of commemorative
yeah,
celebrations throughout history of like these different, even little victories throughout of
yeah,
like their history.
and I thought it was really cool how the Samson's victory here, burning the crops down, made it all the way to Rome. Several hundred, maybe a couple of thousand. I'm not sure exactly what the timeline is there of years later, where it turns from celebrating that into kind of the what's the word I'm looking
Taking
for?
on like pagan connotations.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, no, that's
But
very
kind of
interesting.
just thought it was an interesting point I wanted to bring up.
So we will go into this next part. So Samson has burned down the Philistines' crops, and obviously, so this is just like uh, a back and forth between Samson and the Philistines.
Yeah.
You get a hit, now I get a hit, now you get a hit, now I get a hit. So now the Philistines are now going to move against Samson,
Mm.
and it's in this that you can kind of get lost in the original. The conflict really started when Samson simply married a Philistine, a
Right. Yeah.
Philistine woman, and then he started messing with the guys at the wedding, and then it turned into this, and
Hmm.
it's really a terrible turn of events. So if you want to read verses 6 through 8 there.
Yeah. Then the Philistines said, "Who has done this?" And they said, "Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he has taken his wife and given her to his companion." And the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. And Samson said to them, "If this is what you do, I swear I will be avenged on you, and after that I will quit." And he struck them hip and thigh with a great blow, and he went down and stayed in the cleft of the rock of Edom.
Okay, so we see where it says where they ask who has done this, and it doesn't say
Mm.
who he asks, but we can kind of tell that obviously they know Samson, so it's going to be Samson's kinsman, and they sell him down
Right.
the river. Then the it says Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he was taking his wife and given her to his companion. And so the
Hmm.
Philistines come up, burned her and her father with fire. So they burned. He burned their crops. Now they're going to burn his wife and his father-in-law. And Samson said to them, "If this is what you do, I swear I will be avenged on you, and after that I will quit." And so the Philistines are sort of escalating the conflict. We go from burning of crops now to burning of people. And then in
Right.
verse 8, it says he struck them with hip and thigh with a great blow. And that's basically slang for like he just whooped them. It
Mm.
was a like top down smackdown. Um,
Yeah.
and he went and stayed in the cleft of the rock of Etam. So now he has removed himself from the situation. And he says in verse 7, it says, "If this is what you do, I swear I will be avenged on you, and after that I will quit." And
Right.
he gives him his word. Like he goes, whoops up on him, and then he's like, "I'm removing myself from the situation so that this does not escalate even further."
Yeah.
But the Philistines don't know where to stop, and so they're like, "We are going to get him." And so they make a stink to the Israelites, and they go to the men of Judah, and they make a raid on them. Actually, so I'm gonna read verses 9 through 13, and then we'll go from there.
Okay.
Then the Philistines came up and encamped in Judah and made a raid on Lehi. And when the men of Judah said, "Why have you come up against us?" they said, "We have come up to bind Samson, to do him as he did to us." Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock of Etam and said to Samson, "Do you not know that the Philistines are rulers over us? What then is that you have done to us?" And he said to them, "As they did to me, so have I done to them." And they said to him, "We have come down to bind you, that we may give you into the hands of the Philistines." And Samson said to them, "Swear to me that you will not attack me yourselves." They said to him, "No, we will only bind you and give you into their hands. We will surely not kill you." So they bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. Um, so we see instead of the Israelites standing with Samson and saying, "Hey, yeah, that's our guy," he stood up against the Philistines. They ducked tail and ran when the Philistines came up against them.
Yeah.
And they asked them, "Hey, what do y'all even want? Why are you doing this?" And they're like, "Hey, we want Samson." And they're like, "Oh, okay." So they got scared and they went to Samson and say, "Hey, we got to deliver you into the hands of the Philistines." And Samson just seems kind of discouraged at this point. He's like, "Okay, just promise me that you're not going to kill me yourself, and
Hmm.
I'll do what you ask." Um,
Yeah.
So the fact that the soldiers from the tribe of Judah gave up Samson to the Philistines shows that one, that they were under the oppression of the Philistines, and it says that in the text. But
Mm-hmm.
also, it's a phenomenon where you see somebody that stands up against evil, and instead of siding with the one person that stands up against evil, you turn on them for making a fuss and making it possibly worse for everybody else.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
I thought about whether or not to talk about this, but there was a situation that happened locally where a certain, and I'm not going to get into specifics, but there was a certain non-Christian religious group, I'll just say that
Mm.
was that made their way through town on kind of like a sojourn.
Yeah.
And this is locally, like this is the town I'm in, and some of our local officials were like posting pictures with them and stuff and saying, they're proud of them for, standing for peace or whatever. Well, there was a local pastor. All he said was, "Hey, peace comes from Jesus.
Yeah.
Any other path to peace is a work.
Yeah.
And y'all are basically championing salvation by works, and you're championing the fact that peace comes from within. Peace does not come from within. Peace comes from Christ. Salvation comes from
Yes.
Christ." And he got a ton of backlash. Even the place where their venue that they rented for their church kicked them out
Mm.
of their church.
Really.
And so they turned against it every angle. But through that, I've been keeping up with the story as much as I can. And I see in comments on social media and whatnot, members of that church, and they said, our services have only gotten better since all this has happened. They're very encouraged, but that just goes to show, you would think there would be a large movement standing with this pastor and standing with this church, but I've seen
Right.
virtually
Yeah.
no feedback from any church in the area supporting him. And if anything, I've only seen people, sort of leaving him out to dry. But anyway, so that made me think of that when those people, instead of standing up to the Philistines, said, "Oh no, we'll go and bind him up for you and hand deliver him to you."
Yeah.
And so Samson's turned against of his own people.
He's not going to fight them. He's going to say, all right, well, I'm going to get these Philistines, but I'm going to leave you guys unharmed, because we're fixing to see what he can do to 3,000 people, or was it 2,000?
1,000.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're fixing to see what he can do to 1,000 people.
Right. Yeah.
And so these, which, I mean, I'm sure it wouldn't have been that big a stretch if he wanted to take on 3,000. But
Yeah,
so
no, that's exactly right.
but that's how kind of scared, that it makes me think that they are of him, that it takes 3,000 of them to go and be like, all right, we're going to tie you up and hand deliver you to these 1,000.
Right. Yeah. Because they know what he's capable of.
Yeah.
And they're like, let's just in case, oh, what were you say?
Yeah. I was also going to say, how easily do you think that the 3,000 men of Judah could have taken on the 1,000 men of the Philistines?
And that's another very good point.
They were under that subjugation. They were so afraid of them. And
if there were 3,000 men of Judah alone, and there was only a force of 1,000 Philistines, they could have, in their own power, maybe put up a fight.
But they just handed Samson over with
to
everything but the bow.
Exactly. So, but yeah, go ahead and read verse 14 there.
When he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting to meet him. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and the ropes that were on his arms became as flax that has caught fire, and his bonds melted off his hands. And he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, and put it out on his hand, and took it, and with it he struck 1,000 men. And Samson said, with the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of a donkey, I have struck down 1,000 men.
Okay, so this is where we get our title for the episode. Actually, in a couple verses, it'll be our title for the episode, Jaw Dropper. But he takes up the jawbone of a donkey and just starts like slaying literally 1,000 men with one jawbone. And there's different takeaways you can take from this. One, how does a jawbone withstand being used to destroy 1,000 men? Obviously, it's of the Lord, but it says, I love the imagery that it uses in this writing, where it says, The Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and the ropes that were on his arms became as
Yes.
flax that has caught fire, and his bonds melted off his hands. And that's using figurative language, because I don't think it's literally saying that the bonds like caught fire or that they literally melted, but it's saying Samson was so strong. What do you think?
I think it'd be pretty cool if they just melted off.
Well, I mean, yeah, but I think it just goes to show that it's saying that the
Right, right,
strength Samson had was literally like they melted off because they just went.
right.
But I just thought that was cool. Something to do with this. So the way that the ESV formats it and the way that I think it's supposed to be formatted, a lot of people talk about it, the sort of the poetry that he says in verse 16, it says, with the jawbone, and you just read it, with the jawbone. Hold on. With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey, I have struck down 1,000 men. And so this is what I was talking about the warrior poet. It's this concept that we can find in Greek culture, in some Japanese culture, about how the strongest warriors were also supposed to be the most cultured. And we can kind of see that represented here in Samson, in the fact that not only was he an amazing warrior, but he was smart too, in the way he had a love for riddles. He had a love for poetry. Even the way he formats like his riddle with the lion. This note I saw where it says, with the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps. Samson's bold declaration of victory has a poetic touch that is difficult to render in translation, which makes sense. One effort goes like this: with the jawbone of an ass, I've piled them in a mass. I think that one's kind of funny. But not because it says that word, but because it just goes.
I mean, that's.
But because it kind of lends itself more to the idea that it is poetry, that he's kind of giving a play on words in his victory. So he is like a warrior poet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, besides a lot of criticism, I feel like it's almost kind of taught that way. But Samson's not a dumb guy. He's not like your dumb jock. I feel like more along the lines of what you said, a warrior poet.
Yeah, and he does make okay. So, and I want to clarify, because this is I feel like this chapter is sort of Samson's coming into his own, and it is really like a tragic. It's organized like the story of a tragic hero, like a Greek story, or like one of those famous plays, because we see his origin, we see him acting foolishly in his younger years. This chapter, I would say, is sort of him coming into his own, and him, finally taking up, how he operates in the strength of the Lord, and stepping into that realm of warrior poet. And then in the next chapter is his tragic downfall. So it is literally the arc of he doesn't stay the same in any of these chapters. He's either growing, or he's constantly changing.
Yeah.
This note, and we'll speak on that more here in a second, but I wanted to make a note of this. Samson's unique because usually the judges before him would lead an army into battle, but as we see, the men of Judah were afraid, and so he becomes a one-man army. He becomes the sole arbiter of the Spirit of the Lord. I like this quote from Morgan. I'm not sure who that is, but that's all that was attributed to was Morgan. It says, "We are conscious of what he might have done had he been wholly yielded to that Spirit of Jehovah, who came mightily upon him, instead of being so largely governed by the fires of his own passion." So he's making a note here that, yes, in this instance, in his slaying of the jawbone with slaying of 1,000 men with the jawbone, he is doing it justly and by the power of the Lord. So if he could have operated like that for his entire life, his story may not have ended the way it ended. So we're just getting a glimpse into what Samson could have been, which is very sad for one. But I just thought that was an interesting note, that yes, in this instance, he's operating in the Spirit of the Lord, but it could have been so much more.
Yeah.
So if you want to read 17 and 18 there.
As soon as he had finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone out of his hand, and that place was called Ramath-lehi. And he was very thirsty, and he called upon the Lord and said, "You have granted this great salvation by the hand of your servant, and shall I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?"
Okay, so the idea here is okay. Well, first the Remeth Lehi, that literally means like the jaw. Like he named the
Yeah.
place Jaw because he used the jawbone, and that's going to come into play here in a minute. But Spurgeon kind of brought out this idea that we this sort of is an image of the idea as believers that we will have great victories in life.
Mhm.
The Lord will mightily move upon us. We will have these awesome landmark moments,
Yeah.
but we're also going to wake up the next day. We're also going to have to take the next step. There's going to be
Right.
smaller challenges that come that we're also going to need the Lord for. It's not like we reach this mountaintop in our Christian walk where we no
Mhm.
longer have to deal with these smaller battles. It's yeah, we're at the mountaintop, but also there's just these little things that we have to depend on the Lord for too. So we have to depend on the Lord, to deliver us out of the hand of the 1,000 Philistines, but we also have to we have to depend on the Lord for a drink of water.
Yeah.
So
And
it's
that's it's like what Matthew Poole says right here. Uh it was partly sent by God that by the experience of his own impotency he might be forced to ascribe the victory to God only and not to himself. You know, you hear him say, you have granted this great salvation by the hand of your servant, and shall I now die of thirst? So, he's basically forcing that victory, or, to God's credit, um, because God gave him the victory.
right, yeah, and through that victory, his weakness was made known. Through the
Yeah.
victory that the Lord handed to him, his humanity was shown,
Yeah.
and that he was like, okay, man, I just slew 1,000 guys. I'm thirsty. I'm dehydrated. I need some
Get that man some
electrolytes.
Kool-Aid.
Yeah. So I thought that was a very cool point, to say that yes, we have to depend on the Lord for the great victories, but also in the small things too. It's a total dependence, not
Yeah.
just a mountaintop dependence.
Mhm.
People like to sort of keep God in their back pocket until something really bad happens, or until they really have a
Right.
big question they need to ask. But to live a life as a Christian is to say, Lord, I depend on you always for everything.
Yeah.
You are the source of my breath. You are the source of everything good in my life. You are the source of victory. You are the source of strength. And I depend on you always. So for our last point, as we close this chapter, I want you to read verses 19 and 20. And I'm going to talk about this and give some clarification for something that the KJV renders and how the ESV renders and how we can see the difference there. So go ahead and read verse 19
Mhm.
and 20.
And God split open the hollow place that is at Lehi, and water came out from it. And when he drank, his spirit returned, and he revived. Therefore, the name of it was called En-Hakkore. It is at Lehi to this day. And he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years.
Okay, so the way that the KJV renders this, it says, "But God clave a hollow place that was in the jaw, and there came water thereout." So
But as
the
we just
way,
learned, he
right,
called,
exactly,
yeah,
he named the place Jaw, and
yeah,
so if you only look at the KJV, and this is kind of what I had heard up to this point in different messages and things that I've heard preached,
mm,
there's the view that he literally took the jawbone and God opened it up and water poured like out of the jawbone, like literally like
yeah,
water poured out of the jawbone. And yes, the Lord would technically be able to do that, but it's sort of out of line with the type of miracles that the Lord had done up to this point. Not saying that he can't do something like that, but there is a theme throughout Scripture of the Lord breaking open the earth and water flowing out of the earth. We see that with the Israelites. We see that the Israelites in the wilderness. We see that when the Lord broke up the deepest parts of the earth during the flood. It's this idea
hmm,
of this spring of living water flowing forth out of the earth as a miracle from God, not
yeah,
necessarily a jawbone. Like it doesn't follow with the threads that Scripture has lined up to this point. So it makes
right,
a lot
yeah.
more sense. Oh, what do you say?
I was going to read you what Albert Barnes here says. I really like it. It says, a
Oh yeah,
hollow
go ahead.
place that was in the jaw from the KJV. The right translation is the hollow place which is in Lehi. The word
Right.
translated
Yeah.
hollow place means a mortar, and is here evidently a hollow or basin among the cliffs of Lehi, which from its shape was called the mortar. So I thought this was really cool. A spring on the way from Socho to Eleutheropolis I hope I said that right, was commonly called Samson Spring in the time of Jerome and writers in the 7th, 12th, and 14th centuries.
Oh, cool. So they know
So I
like
thought that,
exactly where it's at.
yeah,
That's very cool. But yeah, so you and that just goes to show when you're studying scripture, you can get sort of caught up in mistranslations from past
mm,
because obviously translators aren't absolutely perfect. There are people that will live and die by the KJV.
yeah.
Of course, there's that clip going that has gone around the internet several
I
times with
could
that pastor
correct the
saying he
Greek
can,
with the who can correct the Hebrew with the KJV. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
foolish.
correct the Hebrew, correct the Greek with the KJV.
Yeah,
And I don't think there's any perfect translate. I like what Wesley Huff says when
yeah,
people ask him what's the best translation of the Bible, and he said the one you read.
yep,
Obviously, there are better and worse translations when you look at thought for thought and word for word translation.
right.
But that is to say, no translation is perfect, and it's up to us to study it out. I like looking at the Strong's, the original
Hmm.
Greek and Hebrew,
Yeah,
to see what the true intent behind that word is. To
right. Yeah.
Scripture tells us to study to show ourselves approved.
Hmm.
But I just thought that was an interesting point because I have heard people talk about take it as literally the Lord opening water in the jawbone and water
Yeah, it
coming
turns
out,
the
but that's
donkey's jawbone into a Gatorade bottle.
exactly.
Yeah.
um, so that's the last point I wanted to make, and then of course verse 20, we end with, and he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines for 20 years. So the next chapter is a time skip 20 years into the future, so we're given no information what happens in those 20 years, but we see that things don't go great for him after that. So Samson was a judge for a while. He judged
Yeah.
Israel, had conflict with the Philistines, and so this is Samson at his height. And we could take a snapshot here, and we could leave Samson here, and we could say, "Hey, he did great. He ended up, he ended up finding the Spirit of the Lord. He ended up, having a great victory over the Philistines." And this is a 3-episode series where we'll just call it here. But that
Yeah.
is not where Scripture leaves Samson, so that's not where we're going to leave Samson. So next week we will be back with part 4, Bring the House Down. This is sort of the hero's journey chapter, like we talked about, in that
Hmm.
Samson's coming into his own. I'll just say he's facing trouble not just from the Philistines, but from
Yeah.
his own countrymen. So it almost starts out as an underdog story where the Philistines, every time Samson does something, it feels like the Philistines, one up him in one way or another. But then he comes
Right.
back and is like, "Okay, we're done with the one upping. We're done here." And so he takes the jawbone, an
Yeah.
unconventional weapon, something that you wouldn't think would do really anything, and he accomplishes a victory greater than anyone had up to that point. And this is how people like to remember Samson. This is, like I
Hmm.
said, the snapshot of a hero that slayed the 1,000 men with the jawbone. We like to remember Samson for his strength because it's fun to remember Samson for his strength.
Yeah.
It's fun to think of Samson as the judge who slayed 1,000 men with a jawbone. But as we said, this is a tragic story. This is a story about weakness, not strength. That's what we
Yeah.
opened the series with. This is a
Yeah.
story about weakness, not of strength. And so next week we will focus more on Samson's weakness. So with that being said, I was gonna look and see. I know we hadn't got to. Actually, you know what? I think I'm good. I think I'm gonna leave that where it's at.
Same.
Uh, there was something I want to cover next week that we'll get a little bit more into is the concept of experiencing something as the person experiencing it and experiencing something as the people reading about it after the fact, and the
Hmm.
lessons that are learned from both of those ways. So
Yeah.
the experiences that we have as people and the lessons we learn from that, and then the lessons that can be learned after the fact of when we repeat those stories to others. I know that's very vague, but we're going to get more into that idea in the next episode when we talk about
Hmm.
this last spot of Samson. So with that being said, that's Jaw Dropper. um, like, subscribe. That's the best way to support the show. And we will see y'all next week. Reagan, you want to sign us off?
Yes. Thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate each and every one of you. Lord bless you and keep you. And we'll see you next time on the Tin Can Dispatch. Thank you for watching.